Okay, welcome to our game brought to you by Fantasy Gaelic Football and Fantasy Hurling. Go to fantasygaelicfootball.com and fantasyhurling.ie. You can win up to 2,300 in prizes, €800 for the first prize, and there's plenty more involved as well. So go to those websites. We're brought to you by them today. So we're going to talk about the draws for the championships in 2021. I'm joined by Michael Verney of the Irish Independent and Declan Bogue, who writes for many different publications, as we've seen over the years. Michael and Declan, welcome. We have a Zoom audience on board today. We can see them all piling in there, so great to see people there. And if they want to write any questions, we can monitor them and maybe put them up at different stages. Hopefully everyone can hear us okay. Just starting off with you, Michael, we'll go into the Munster draw and look at the draw there. So Clare against Waterford in the hurling, then the semi-final Limerick against Cork and Tipperary against Clare or Waterford. Any thoughts on that draw?
Yeah, I'd say from a Tipperary point of view, they'd be happy enough with the draw, to be honest with you, because they're obviously through to the semi-finals. They did an absolute nightmare draw last year. Couldn't have really been much worse with Limerick coming in and having had a game under their belt. So
yeah, somebody's got to go in heavy there music.
I'm a big Miley Cyrus fan. I have to say, I don't enjoy her as much as I enjoy hurling, but I am a big Miley Cyrus fan.
Yeah, I presume that's one of the lads doing a bit of messing there, so I'm just gonna have to remove him so I can keep this thing going. That's the danger when you throw these things out into the ether, that someone is going to do a bit of messing. To be honest, I kind of admire it, but I have to knock him out all the same.
I'd probably do the same. It's like, I've been the rogue 5th year or 6th year in school, just trying to cause a bit of trouble, isn't it?
Yeah. Declan, would you be up to that sort of capers?
It's a bit, podcasts are a bit like newspapers. We used to say in Gaelic life, the readership wasn't great at times. Like when we used to say, like, readers, who needs them?
Okay, we'll jump back to the draw then. Michael Verney, looking at that Munster draw, you're saying if you're a Tipperary man, as I am, that you're quite happy to avoid Limerick. But Cork draw on Limerick. Cork are the one team that seemed to be able to trouble Limerick.
Yeah, they're the one team traditionally over the last 3 or 4 years that have troubled them. They obviously beat them in the 2019 Munster Championship. They should have beaten them in normal time in 2018 All-Ireland semi-final. For whatever reason, they just seem to have the tools to trouble them. So that's a really interesting game. There's obviously been a good bit of movement in Cork in the off-season, a good few retirements and a good few new faces thrown in as well. They'll be they can trouble Limerick. So while it's theoretically an easier passage to a Munster Championship for Limerick because they don't have to win 3 games this year, there is something that Cork just seem to be able to match up well with them. I don't know if it's that kind of, if it's the fact that, I don't know, Cork just seem to have something. I remember being down at that game in the Gaelic grounds in 2019, and it's that kind of carefree attitude that Cork can have from time to time just seems to trouble Limerick. Limerick didn't have a game under their belts that day, in fairness too, but it's great because that's a really point of view. You're going to get a great game on the other side then as well. With Clare and Waterford. Waterford obviously massive year last year, made huge strides. They're not straight through to a semi-final like they were last year. They're going to have to go a much more difficult passage through to a Munster final. So from a Clare point of view, I know there's an awful lot going on in the background in Clare at the moment and focuses on anything but hurling. But they will see that, that's as, apart from maybe meeting Cork, that's as winnable a game as Clare are going to have in Munster this year, and they're going to have in the championship this year. So a chance to get a championship win for Clare, and he drew with them then in that goal game. So for massive incentives for everyone there. From a neutral's point of view, you can't ask for anything more. You're getting a load of really to really call any of those games really confident leader at the moment.
Absolutely. Jared Brown's after messaging on Zoom that maybe the guy who was doing a bit of dancing was just showing his delight at the Munster draw. Declan, from afar, What are your thoughts on that Munster draw? Anything stick out to you? And also what Michael was saying about the Clare situation, all the ruxes they've had, the issues they've had with Cahir Lohan and all this kind of stuff. Do you think that disrupts the players' preparation for the season, or are they that bothered, and once you're down to the hurling and the training, it doesn't affect you that much?
I don't know. I think it'll be a little bit arrogant of us to say it doesn't get the players. I don't know if the players in any way take any notice of this, because all we ever hear about now as journalists and people in the media is that we don't read the newspapers anyway. Whether all these things are being played out in a board sense and even online, does that matter to players who are still turning up? If you look at any player, right to the very end of their career, they believe that they can achieve something. They believe that they can get something out of it. So would, for example, take, for example, someone just speaking on a field player in football. He's been playing since '07, and Cavan were relegated to Division 3 after the league campaign, and they finished up with the best ever year of his life, like winning football sense, winning an Ulster Championship. Do the Clare hurlers that are turning up for training, 2, 3, 4 times now a week from the word go, do they really care about all the sort of things that have been said online about Pat Fitzgerald? I don't think so. Could it perhaps spur them on? Could Brian Lohan use it to advantage that, come talking about us and we need to put a wee bit of pride into the jersey? Perhaps so. I think that all of this is shaped by what happens then, because if Clare do have a successful year, say if they could overturn Waterford, and that would seem to be a big ask, then the first thing that people will credit it is, well, these Clare players were under siege. Really, the Clare players are not under siege. What it is sharp practice, or misgivings about people on the board and things that have gone on before. It's practically irrelevant to what actually happens on the field, but that will actually then become the frame in which performances are judged thereafter.
Absolutely. Just looking on to the Leinster draw this year. So a couple of tasty enough games here. Dublin against Antrim, Wexford against Laois. Then Kilkenny, they will meet Wexford or Laois in the semi-final, whereas Dublin and Antrim, their reward for beating Galway will be to play Galway. So, Michael Verney, actually, do you know what? I'll stick with you for a second, Declan, here, because I'm sure you know a little bit about Antrim hurling. I've done plenty of interviews up that neck of the woods over the years. How do you feel about Antrim coming back in, and would there be, what's the expectation level like?
Well, I was thinking about that this morning, and I suppose a great starting off point, a wee bit of controversy, was maybe just the sort of lack of regard there that Donal Logue had after they won the Joe McDonagh Cup, and there's a little tiny bit of resentment maybe in Antrim because, again, it's fringe issues like Conor McCann's speech after beating Kerry was cut off and it wasn't broadcast. It's Donal Logue then saying that he would be wary of them, that they're like a boxer moving up into a higher division where their weight doesn't match the ambition. They would feel there would be a sense though in Antrim hurling since sort of Sambo and Woody took over about 2016. There was a bit of a disastrous league campaign. They took over, and there's a couple of painful years that followed, because those men in particular would want a certain type of character. It's a bit like the Walter Scott saying that you hire character and teach the skills rather than chasing after these, sort of flamboyant hurlers. You would actually get on board the personalities and then try and shape them thereafter. But that has gone hand in glove then with Neil Peden coming in, and he then managed the team for a season or two before stepping up into. Neil Peden was instrumental in getting Darren Gleeson, obviously the Liam Sheedy connection. Liam was brought in by Sambo and Murray. The whole thing has evolved then. Darren Gleeson's the manager. They brought in Brendan Murphy as the S&C coach, and I know that some of the veterans, the Neil McManus's, and so on, would feel very hopeful for this present generation that this is the most dedicated, the most committed bunch of hurlers they've had. That doesn't always necessarily translate into success. What you've got is Dublin, though. It's in a neutral venue. It'll have no fans there. Like, there's a lot of things that come into play, and we've seen in the football world how the no fans, whether it is or isn't, somebody else can maybe tease that out, but there can be an effect on that. And when you strip away any expectation or any kind of boisterous support, then unusual things can happen. And with the retirement of Paul Ryan, of Dublin's reserves, or their sort of structure, their leadership group, and so on, slightly depleting. I know there's continuity there. Matty, you're out, Butty, going in his third year there, but I definitely think, given the sort of fellowship that Darren Gleeson has foisted onto this group, that Antrim will definitely be they'll be looking at this and saying, "This is a great draw." Well, we could have got Laois, and then suddenly the expectation then is, Antrim would be expecting to beat Laois, and now it's if they beat Dublin, it would be something of a scalp. Now it would be probably just as, maybe it wouldn't be as big a scalp as Antrim beating Dublin in 2010, the championship, but it'd certainly be a scalp, and it's something for them to aim for.
I think definitely Dublin will want to lay down a marker after that 2010 game. Michael, Seamus Cheddar-Plunkett is back in with Laois after a couple of years of Eddie Brennan. Do you think it's going to be tough for him to hit the ground running here? I mean, obviously everyone's preparations have been hampered, but after the breakthroughs of the last couple of years, probably a bit of a downturn last year, where do you see them going this year?
I think the fact that they know him well and he knows them well is obviously, I think it's a massive advantage, because he's not coming into a squad cold. He knows all the players well. He knows their tendencies well. He follows Laois club hurling religiously. He follows hurling throughout the country religiously. So he'll know his players fairly intimately. They obviously will only have been meeting last night for the first time. He was obviously one of the most kind of late appointments, and he was quite a while putting his backroom team together as well. But at least he's been there and done it before, and he's had a few big championship results. Of course, beating my own Offaly there in his first term. I think it had been back to the 70s before they'd beaten him in championship as well. So I think he's coming in there. It'll be much easier to do his job with the knowledge that he has from his previous reign and the knowledge he has of the players. He's coming in against the Wexford side, where it looks like it's going to be Davy's fifth and final year. They took a big blow, I think, the other day with Paddy Foley opting out. I know it had been in the balance over the last couple of months, but he's a huge player for them. And you wouldn't say Wexford's reserves are as big as a lot of the other counties that would, have aspirations of winning All Ireland. So they're going to have to unearth another defender. You would have imagined that Wexford would be jigging their team around a small bit this year and trying to find something a bit new. I don't know if there's that many new players. There's probably going to be a couple of new faces. And I know Glenn Malone, who was in with the footballers, is in there. Whether he'll come in to feature will be interesting. But it's just the loss of Paddy Foley, and that is a big thing. You'd imagine there would be a bounce from Wexford this year, knowing it's probably going to be Davies' last year of 5. They've gone year on. Yes, if you're following that system, this should be a year on. They have no, Davy has no fallback after this. This is basically it for them. So it's going to be interesting. They admitted mistakes. I was chatting to Saoirse Bulfin there, the coach, a couple of weeks ago. They admitted they went way too hard in the first lockdown last year, and they were flagging then by the time it came to championship in October. But from a Laois point of view, Laois are still going to be massive outsiders in that game. Just in the other quarter final, as Dec was saying there, like Conal Keeney stepping aside didn't play much last year. Was brilliant in 2019. Paul Ryan probably the same, but I would have doubts on the strength of the Dublin squad, and we were seeing them against Clare last year and just been very underwhelmed with what I was seeing from the squad as a whole. So I definitely think there's Darren Gleeson would see that as an opportunity knocking there for Antrim in his second season. He did everything he would have wanted to do last year, ticked every box, didn't blow Kerry away in the final either. So they're coming in probably with a bit of realism into the championship this year. And I think that's probably funny enough, I think that's probably the more interesting of the two quarterfinals.
And just to go quick fire then, who would your predictions be for the two provinces? I'll stick my neck on the block first. I'll say Limerick for Munster. They just look unstoppable and they're going to be hard to stop completely all year. And then in the hurling, it's a little bit more open. Can Wexford get back to 2019 levels? I'm going to go with Galway. Declan, what do you think? Both provincial championships.
No, nobody is going to dispute anyone calling for Limerick to just kind of wipe out everything in their path, like, because we've seen before where champions can look invincible, and that can end very badly. Very just something the size and everything about Limerick that you can never, like, no sensible person could make a call against them. Leinster's so entertaining, and I don't know, maybe it's all about who has done the best work in lockdown. You guys would be closer on the ground and can tell me who's done the most training collectively in lockdown.
Nobody has.
But it's the smart way. I mean, I'm not bringing it back to football, but it was something that caught my eye about 6 weeks ago. Was Mickey Graham said about Cavan is they did not meet up during the first lockdown, and he got his players back for the first time ever. They were completely injury free, and I think that needs to be looked at. Was the teams that were coming back that had been going hell for leather or whatever and had incurred injuries, obviously then that sunk them by the time championship came around. You can even look at a couple of injuries that Donegal had, however they came about or whatever encouraged those injuries to happen. But Cavan were playing off full deck for the first time in God knows how many years, and look what happened. So you could nearly examine who's in charge of their athletic development or strength conditioning or whatever we call it nowadays, and go off the hedge your bets on that side of it.
Michael.
You notice I didn't name anyone there too. Like, I don't know.
I don't want to keep it going.
Just an interesting one I'd like to put out to the 2E, because I think it is, like, there's a gap, obviously, a fairly sizable gap between Limerick and the rest. And I think the lack of collective training until last night, and they're only going to be collectively meeting over the next couple of weeks, I do think it makes it harder for people to bridge the gap between Limerick and the rest in hurling and between Dublin and the rest in football. It's just how do you make up those gaps within that short time frame? And I suppose that's probably why we're hearing and seeing, obviously Dublin were one of the teams that were doing some training, maybe when they shouldn't have been, but that's probably why we're hearing about teams trying to make up those gaps. And I just think it's going to be very, very hard for teams to bridge the gap with Limerick and Dublin this year. That's just another factor, I think, on it. I think Limerick will win Munster, and just on what Declan said there about their athletic development, and just even the way the draw is based in Leinster. I think Galway are probably primed to win Leinster. Just obviously coming into a semi-final, to be meeting either Dublin or Antrim, they will fancy their chances big time in that game, and they should be primed then for a Leinster final against either Kilkenny or Wexford. So not particularly original, but it'd be going with Limerick and Galway.
And I agree with you. I think it's going to be tough for teams to bridge the gap, because they don't, even if they get bigger and stronger and faster in the gym, they don't have time to practice their game plan, that type of thing, because that's a matter of repetition over and over again.
Just on that as well, Shane, on something Deck said too, like the boot's going to be underfoot this year. It was clubs last year where lads were going back, and there was calves and there was hamstrings and there was all sorts of little bits of knocks picked up. That's going to basically happen over the league stages over the next month to 6 weeks. There's going to be loads of little calf strains, loads of little calf tears, loads of little hamstring tears, and then the proximity of those league games to championship, your fingers and toes are crossed every week. You pick up a hamstring and you're out for a month. You're under pressure then coming into championship, and there's no real back doors unless you're getting to a provincial final. So I'd imagine it's going to be similar to last year. You'd hope with the levels of sports science that are going in, particularly at county level, that there wouldn't be as many muscle injuries and that, but the intensity of the action is also a lot higher than clubs. So you'd be expecting like every game for lads to be bowing out after an hour with little, or even 25 minutes at different stages with little bits of knocks. And that has a, particularly for counties that don't have great strength and depth, that's going to have a massive knock-on effect on their championship aspirations as well.
Can I just say, it's like Shane, just is to develop that point is sometimes we are talking about the S&C and some coaches get a huge amount of credit when a team achieves something, and you would imagine that this lockdown is not new. People know what's happening and they should plan accordingly, right? So the idea of getting hamstrings and all that, and most people would say, how on earth, if you pay someone an expert at expert rates and they have all this experience and they've been involved in XYZ type of sports, right? They should know what they're dealing with their athletes, and they should prepare them accordingly. And there should be no hamstring, and there should be no calf injuries. But the flip side of that is, and I was talking to an intercounty player there last week who told me that it's nothing to do with that. It is nothing. He says, some of the times that people are posting on 5Ks and 10Ks is just off the charts. It's unbelievable. They've got a great base of fitness that's present, but it's the contact. So when you go into contact and you're getting the energy levels sucked out of you by contact, and anyone that actually mans these GPS systems in a game will see, like you can see the effort levels it takes on the runs that they're doing in the first 10 minutes compared to then maybe the 50th to 60 minutes. The runs and the efforts just get lower and lower. But then when there's contact, and then it's another, like a power bar when Michael's on one of his beat 'em up computer games, and it's slightly when it decreases throughout the game. So that's the major thing. Now, as we know, hurling has probably more collisions, than football at the moment because of the way the football is being played, and that gives then Limerick the massive advantage because they're so physically powerful.
Yeah, I think when you're playing hurling and you can do all the training you want, but when you get hit, you're forced to sort of stabilise yourself in different ways, whether it's dig your foot in a certain way when you're going at speed, and it's all this change of direction stuff. And same in football too, but certainly the point is taken, and a lot of it is going to be who can keep their players fit. We'll jump on now to the football championship, and we'll just kind of blaze through Munster here. So Clare have been drawn against Kerry. No luck at all for Colm Collins. He's drawn Kerry too many times, I'd say, for his liking. Waterford are against Limerick. Then Tipperary will play the winners of Clare against Kerry, and I think most people would expect that would be Kerry. So the Kingdom looking to dethrone the Premier there. And then Cork will be on the other side of the draw against the winners of Waterford and Limerick. And after losing that Munster final the way they did last year, no doubt they'll be looking to get back on top. Declan, do you fancy Kerry to regain their title?
Well, I'll tell you, Peter Keane could find himself going down Carricktool pretty at a faster rate of knots now next winter if he doesn't. Look, it's that simple for them. Like this is the last throw of the dice for certainly for him. They will not tolerate another year of what happened. And whether they were playing Cork with a system with a view later on, and this is the view of common currency, that they're playing Cork with a certain defensive system, so that if they met Dublin later down the road, this is what they're going to do. I mean, I just cannot get my head around that. They were part of one of the greatest All-Ireland finals of all time in the drawn game. Was it the highest scoring first half of all time in any All-Ireland final in the first half of that? Like, I mean, I know that over and over, that's you're doomed to insanity, really, because you're going to fail over and over. But like, there really was only just a bounce of the ball or a tiny break or a slip of the foot in those games. And I just think the Kerry are just patently unsuited in their genetic makeup to play in more laborious, strategic sense. I just think actually, elements of what they enjoy doing. Obviously, they've won their last All-Ireland, they won with extreme pragmatism, but that was perhaps an exceptional case where they're meeting Donegal in the final and they had to figure a way around Donegal's counter-attack at that point. But if they do, I'd be putting myself down for Kerry winning Munster this year. Yeah.
Michael, what do you think? And what Declan is saying there, and I suppose it was summed up by picking your two wing forwards as Ronan Buckley and Brian O'Beogley in that game against Cork last year. It seemed sort of ultra defensive. I know they were missing lads too, but do you expect them to be able to turn it around this year? And do you think Peter Keane is very much on borrowed time in terms of he has to do something big this year?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say he's on. I wouldn't say he's on borrowed time. They obviously missed an absolutely glorious opportunity to end Dublin's dominance. Who knows if they'd done that in the drawing game in 2019, maybe we'd be talking about a completely different scenario. Maybe they would have been going for back to back. Maybe it would have ended Dublin's dominance. It would have given somebody that impetus to realise that they could be beaten, and then all of a sudden others might also believe that they're fallible. But they obviously made a big. It was a big boo-boo last year. There was all sorts of murmurs in the background about different things, and a bit of unrest in the camp and things like that. They've been shut down by a few people fairly close to the camp. But I suppose the loss of Donny Buckley last year was a big one. I think he's been involved in every All Ireland or every game nearly where Dublin has been pushed anywhere close in the last 5 or 6 years. He's obviously gone up to Monaghan now, which is a big kind of feather in their cap. But they obviously have to do something this year, and it looks like it's kind of doesn't look like there's going to be any. It looks like it's set up for them for a Munster final, Cork versus Kerry, and anything other than getting back to an All Ireland final, and it'll probably be the end of the road realistically for Peter Keane. Just on the Munster draw, I think Limerick are probably the biggest winners of that Munster draw. It's probably forgotten, if it hadn't been for Conor Sweeney's sideline last year to force extra time. Limerick probably would have been the ones going on and into a Munster final, and maybe not saying that they would have shot Cork maybe like Tip did, but they are making good strides under Billy Lee, and they played great stuff against Tip. They had them dominated for the first half, so you'd imagine they'd be beating Waterford. Having seen what Tip did to Cork last year in the Munster final, you'd imagine that they would see that as potential opportunity. I'm sure they won't be looking past Waterford. Shane Ronan in there in his first year with Waterford. But I think Limerick is probably the biggest opportunity is for Limerick. What do you want out of a Munster draw? Avoid Kerry until a Munster final if at all possible. So I think Limerick is the one where there's probably an opportunity knocking for them this year. The draw has probably panned out as well as it possibly could for them.
So I'm going to move on to the Connacht draw now, and it was Mayo against Sligo in the quarter-final, Leitrim were against the winners of Mayo and Sligo, and then Roscommon against Galway on the other side. There was a small bit of histrionics, I think, after this one, because a lot of people were fairly upset with how the draw went. Now, I'm not saying anything untoward happened here, but if I just throw it up on the screen, I think we can all see it, that there was a little dip into the bowl. There was one of the drums was pulled out. No, throw it back and we go again. And I think a few people were a little unhappy with how that went. Now, there could be any number of reasons that happened. I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't think that there's necessarily anything untoward going on there. I think there's probably people out there who feel that it's a little bit... It doesn't look great, and maybe that you should go and do the draw again. Any thoughts on that? I mean, as I said, we're not suggesting that untoward happened.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the old lotto thing back in the day, the club lotto, where they'd always say that there's 4 of the balls have been stored in the fridge and are a little bit colder maybe than the other 28 or 32 that are in the draw, but. As they say nowadays, the optics didn't look very good. That's to say the least.
What do you think, Declan?
Oh yeah, I mean he definitely he picked up the hot one and it scalded him.
Any thoughts on the draw though anyway? It means that Mayo, who'll be expected to beat Sligo and then be expected to beat Leitrim, that they're going to most likely get to the kind of final, and then we'll have a good final with Roscommon and Galway on the other side.
Yeah, as it always was, and as it ever shall be in Connacht. And I mean, there's very little you can say apart from that, other than wouldn't it just be fantastic if we could get a limited amount of people in at these games? John Fogarty was writing in his column today in the Examiner about this and saying, how can Cork and Kerry play at the height of summer with infection rates hopefully an awful lot lower and nobody there. I mean, I just, even more locally, like the Portadown soccer manager Matthew Tipton was calling for, saying that people are going to be in the pubs now from the end of this month in the north. They're going to be all hanging out outside drinking, but they're going to be sitting around tables and they're going to be along benches sitting right beside people outdoors. And like the idea of these soccer grounds and GAA grounds cannot accommodate fans at least a third of the capacity, like is starting. The argument for that is null and void as far as I'm concerned. Like, I mean, it just would be an awful pity for another Connacht final to go by, a Munster final, without anyone there to see it.
I agree, Michael. I mean, we've talked about the health and safety. 0.1% of cases are outdoors.
Yeah, they can, like, as Dex is there, you can still do it without having everyone in on top of each other like that. You can still have a decent crowd without blatantly throwing people into a 15,000 seat or anything like that. And it's just they just see it's the championship. Those championships are going to be 15 months after COVID first hit these shores, and it's flabbergasting to think that there will more than likely at the moment be no one there. I saw Leinster Rugby had tried to get a pilot scheme going where they would bring some fans back to the RDS, and I think they pitched the idea to the government 11 days ago, and they're still waiting for some sort of communication back from them. So while we want it, I'd say it still looks very unlikely, unfortunately, that it's going to happen, that we're going to have anyone at these games, which is a shame, an awful shame, really. And limit the capacity a small bit, and just try and get back to some semblance of normality if we can at all. But it doesn't look like it's going to be likely.
I'm just going to jump onto the Leinster draw here, and I think this kind of sums up people's disinterest, I suppose, with the draws this week, because there barely been a flicker from people from what I've seen. But anyway, the draw is Offaly against Louth, Wicklow against Wexford, Carlow against Longford. Kildare will play the winners of Offaly Louth. Dublin will have it rough against Wicklow or Wexford, as I'm sure we can all imagine. Laois will play Westmeath, and Meath against Carlow. Doesn't this kind of sum it up? The lack of imagination in our draws, that second year in a row we're now going to be knockout football, but they've decided to stick with the old provincial setup, and we're denied what could be great novel ties from all over the country, Declan.
Yeah, and I mean, if it was going to happen, it would happen in front of no fans, right? Okay, because if you're counting on spectators to be in there, I'm not so sure that you'll always get a bumper crowd at Tyrone Donegal. You'll get a decent crowd at Fermanagh Calvin. Would you get any crowd at Fermanagh Waterford or Tyrone Waterford football? Like, you just don't. Like, so I mean, financially it wouldn't have made any sense. In order to change that and have an open draw, like, it is a good argument, it's a good debate, it's a good story, but we both know that in order for something like that to happen, it would necessitate like years of negotiating politically. It would need to you'd be taking the power away from provincial councils, and they don't take things like that they don't take anything like that easily. It just would be a political impossibility to have had an open draw, much as we might have liked. And yeah, it does. You do get weary of seeing the same draws over and over. Of course you do. But until there exists a time where, and I do believe that maybe, from what I'm led to believe, that Larry McCarthy might be interested in somewhat pulling power away from provincial councils. And this is a suspicion based on new conversations, and that process starts, then you're getting closer to an open. And at that point, then you've got to ask yourself, right, if you can't win the big one, then kind of what's the point then if there's not local pride at stake here? Munster hurling, Ulster football, it will always be, the counties in those provinces will always want to maintain their championship, and they will always want some reward at the end of it. But there's nothing more depressing at the moment in Gaelic games than the Leinster Football Championship draw. It's just so boring and nondescript. There are scratch it a wee bit. Like there are elements of it that you kind of look at awfully loud and think, well, there's Mickey Hart on the sideline. That's going to be a trip for Louth fans to see. It's going to be a trip for Tyrone fans to also see. Carlo Longford, how did Carlo follow up a wee bit of that Turek O'Brien years, like with the optimism that had? You can always get, but no, look, it's just not going to excite anybody really.
Boys, what's the feeling in a Wicklow camp and a Wexford camp this morning when you see the draw? Because there's one or two ways you can look at it. You can look at it as a glorious opportunity, or basically where you're probably going to be on TV. It's going to be one of the focus games of the weekend because you're going to be playing, the winners are going to be playing the Dubs. Or do you look at it as the potential bloodbath that it's going to be, and just how we're basically just going to be lambs to the slaughter?
It's what you just think focus on the league. That's all you think, really. Because, what chance have you? You're not even going to keep it kicked out.
That's what around 24 to 26 counties do. I can recall having a conversation with the Antrim S&C man on the first weekend in February a few years ago. Their first two opening league games, they'd lost both of them. And with that, probably their chance of promotion from Division 4 was gone. And really, I was having a conversation with him, and he was talking about the year ahead, and I was thinking to myself, your year's over. There's no point. Antrim football now, the year is gone for you, and that's the way it is for an awful lot of counties. And nothing will ever replace that buzz of playing for your county and the pride that players get in that, of course. But the championship is not the be all and end all for 24 to 26 counties.
The final word then on the Ulster Championship. The draw hasn't happened just yet, Declan, but are you excited for that?
Oh, I am always excited for the Ulster Championship draw. Because, it's just like anything else. If you see there's new management in some quarters, like Fergal Logan and Brian Dooher are now in charge, and if they land at Donegal, you can just see them looking at this draw between fingers of their hands, covering their eyes kind of job. See who Mickey Graham comes up against. And that's probably me being parochial. Actually, I'm going to turn the question back on you, Shane, and you, Michael. Do Free Staters, do other people outside of Ulster get excited about the Ulster Football Championship draw?
I'll let you go first, Michael.
Not so much, but I tell you what, I have more interest this year just because of the new faces in Tyrone. The fact that they could end up facing an old friend in Enda McGinley, maybe in Antrim as well. That there's just maybe a few more narratives to it potentially, but not really. Do I see the winners of Ulster potentially winning the All Ireland? No. The only thing is, last year threw up. Did I think that when the Ulster draw came out that we were going to get what we did after? No. But in fairness, it threw up one of the great days, along with Tipperary beating Cork. But I have to be honest. Ulster football draws wouldn't particularly excite me. If I'm honest, the old Ulster hurling draw nearly would have excited me more.
What I'd say about it is, I'm not overly excited about the Connacht football draw. The Leinster football draw is grim. The Leinster hurling one's okay. Munster hurling is, you're going to get good games, but I'm sick of looking at the same draws all the time. So if I say I'm not enthused about the Ulster Football Championship draw, then that's probably just running the mill, because I find the provinces so boring and such a waste of an opportunity of great matchups from across the country. But still, I always like seeing how Monaghan get along. I think Cavan have become a really interesting team to watch. Tyrone, what will Conor McKenna be like in year 2? Is Colin McShane going to be right? Can Donegal step up again? So I think there are a lot of reasons to be interested in, as much as any other province, Declan.
I covering it here as your sort of bread and butter. You're always going to be interested in seeing. You say Conor McKenna, I could say Dara Canavan. And the chances are that if you look at Sean Boylan and Pete McGrath and all these other sort of managers that were there for a damn long time, it's very hard for a manager to come in and just be successful straight away. That is always the suspicion, that a team has not been successful, and then like a Pete McGrath figure steps away, as he did in 2002 after losing to Longford, right? But Down didn't particularly get much better. They reached the Ulster final, took it to a replay the following year, which was actually, in fairness to Paddy O'Rourke, that was a fairly decent return. But people are saying that Tyrone are waiting to explode. Like, Tyrone were Ulster champions in 2016 and 2017 and reached the All-Ireland final in 2018. And, they were still a very top 3-4 team under Mickey Hart. Fergal and Brian are coming in now, and I feel for them, and anyone kind of with half a bit of sense would feel for them, because they've got absolutely no time to really get their underneath the skin of these players, to get buy-in from the players, to really get inside their heads. So they're completely freewheeling into this league campaign and championship. So that, for me, that's a huge area of interest. Michael mentioned Andy McGinley, but you also got Stephen O'Neill there too. And I think from what I've seen of the draft fixtures, that's actually the first. That's the first game that Antrim footballers they have loathed, as things would as chance would have it. Like, they're meeting Mickey Hart in the first game. So, like, in terms of the Ulster Championship, I think there's enough there. Like, you've got the longest serving football manager alongside Con Collins and Kieran McGeeney, and he has made it clear that this is the last year. He has said it, like, when he took on the last when he said he would do another 2-year term, he said that'd be enough for everybody, then, him and the players at that point. And he's going into Division 1 up against Tyrone, Monaghan and Donegal, and then he has the chance of maybe drawing another one of them in the championship. So, like, Armagh's fascinating, Tyrone's fascinating, Monaghan with Banty will always be fascinating, like, especially given the current circumstances. Cavan as the new champions are, obviously they're going to carry that. And Derry under Rory Gallagher will be a team to watch, just to see what they actually achieve. And obviously then you've got their minor stories just going on underneath that. So I found Michael's comments very interesting, especially about the Ulster Hurling Championship would have interested him, and, like, that's an awful pity that has gone. But, like, I did attend an awful lot of the last number of Ulster Hurling finals when it was on death's door, like, and it was a death rattle. Like, Armagh got to the final a couple of times, and it really was a kind of a pointless competition at that point.
I had the pleasure of talking to Big Jeffrey McGonigal the other day, Declan. Oh my God, what a trip down memory lane there, and there was absolutely no punches pulled, because I actually it was just on one of the comments you made there. I think it was the 1998 Ulster final. He scored an overhead goal.
Yes.
And I saw it and I said, "Jeez, this is as good a reason as any to talk to this man." But I always actually liked the Ulster Championship, the Ulster Hurling Championship.
And you see, the thing when Down were in competing in that, I mean, Down beat Cork in the league there in 93, 94, and they had an unbelievable team with the McGrattans and Ger Gilmore and so on. And, like, the crowds at the Ulster finals in those early 90 periods, the Casement Park was absolutely rammed. You could see that I know that the stand's always going to be full for a provincial final, but around the banks of Casement back then, and you could cram some amount of people into a bank, like, they were stuffed too. And I remember going to the 2003 Ulster final in Casement, and it was Derry. In fact, I think Jeffrey might have played in that one too. And I was around the bank, and the concrete was in place by then, and it was just empty. Everything within 4 or 5 years, that whole impetus in Ulster hurling just flatlined.
Absolutely. I think we've kind of gone through all of it at this stage. That's all the draws. Obviously, as I said, the Ulster Championship draw hasn't happened yet in the football, so we'll look at that no doubt in the coming days. So Michael and Declan, thanks very much for joining me, and don't forget to check out the Fantasy GAA Hurling League and Football League as well. There's lots of prizes on offer. Thanks, lads.
Thank you, Shane.